with a femto together as a service to go and sell it to somebody that has only mobile broadband. As a way to offload that mobile broadband, and so fixed broadband could come, back into somebody's life, somebody that's cut it off as well. So there's all sorts of things, dynamics going on. It's really hard to predict, exactly where that's headed.
Is there a danger in the carriers cannibalizing their own pricing model with FemtoCells?
Well, they're not all. I guess we could all take a shot at that one. They're not all pricing it the same way. So the first operators are effectively pricing it. They're going after the coverage challenged user that's willing to pay for coverage. And they're basically saying if you purchase the FemtoCell, you can have coverage. So there's no cannibalization that's happening in that model. Sprint is the only carrier that's offering what's called discounted calling, where they're saying you can, for $10 a month, you can effectively get make all the calls you want, right? So you're right, in certain markets that's not going to work because the pricing is already so low, it's already flat rate and so forth, and so you will have this extreme cannibalization that's going on and so forth. But in those markets, they're not doing that discounted calling. They're not using that as the value proposition. The value proposition, for example, in Japan, the FemtoCells are free. But the way that it works in Japan is they try to generate value for the operator by either recruiting other family members onto the FemtoCell and offering you a discounted calling plan because you have 4 or 5 people on it, or they've already instituted these FemtoZone services. The first one being alerts for parents when the kids come home and so forth. That's already happening in Japan. It's already become a commercial service through entity Docomo. Docomo's a provider of FemtoCells.
Totally subsidized.
Yeah. So there are certain markets where it makes sense to do that, right? And so I think that it's too early to generalize, that FemtoCells will be priced in a particular way. There's really a great variety of ways it's being done right now.
And don't forget there are advantages to the operator, right? I mean, the macro offload, the data offload. I mean, if they may be willing to cannibalize to some degree, and if there is an uptick, say $10, exactly, and is the subscriber really truly going to reduce their minutes count and to offset? I think it's probably worth it to the operator.
You got any comments on that, Barlow?
The biggest problem that an operator has is churn, and that's going to cost them $250 right there. And I think that right now in the FemtoCell market, they're more concerned about that. If I was an operator and I've heard them talk, they're more concerned about, depending on which hat they have on the marketing side, about the churning customer. And on the RAN side, they're in a total panic because they cannot build 4G fast enough. They're not putting the money into 3G, and they need to offload all this new data because it will become, it'll come back to the lawyers because they'll say, and there's been some talk of this when the iPhone came out last summer, of a class action suit because AT&T wasn't delivering the service that they promised. That's in a contract. And so, the RAN guys say, well, we just can't handle it. We're not ready for this. And so they're at that point where they would be wise, in my estimation, to push FemtoCells out the door for free.
Okay. I have a question, actually. A couple of interesting things in the news recently. You may have seen that at last eBay has managed to sell Skype, potentially for more than they bought it. So buy some eBay shares today. And Skype itself, of course, is incredibly popular. And we've also seen recently that Sprint has mandated that every smartphone it will procure in the future must have Wi-Fi. So one of the questions is, Skype works really quite well, even on Wi-Fi. Is that the real competition for femtocells? That the 4G market isn't a battle between WiMAX and LTE. It's actually a battle between femtocells and Skype with Wi-Fi. Would the panelists care to comment on that?
UMA has been in existence for a while now, and it has not taken over the hype or the femto market at all. There are some limited deployments, and FT and T-Mobile are definitely proponents of the technology, and they've had some success with it. But I I think just the fact, well, so Sprint's going to put Wi-Fi on the phone. I don't think it will replace the, I guess, the convenience of that FemtoCell, I guess the convenience of that, the universal interface that you're used to inside the home or out. I think that's the challenge Skype has from taking over the mobile in the first place.
So, yeah, David, I know you wrote about this in your blog. He has a good blog.
ThinkFemtoCell.com.
Right.
Thanks.
But basically, the carriers are struggling with, and in Skype in particular, where the iPhone, you can't load Skype onto the iPhone, the most popular smartphone being sold right now. You can get on the Wi-Fi with the Skype, but you cannot use UMA with Skype on the iPhone. Another carrier is charging a small, like Orange, or I can't remember who it is, a small premium per month that will allow you to use Skype and your Skype minutes. So I think that where we're heading is towards a true convergence, where you'll be able to use a True Phone or Skype if you want to pay extra for that, and where the voice minutes will not be really what the carriers are collecting. Those voice minutes, the voice revenues will be dropping, and your sort of more data plan or data revenues or ability to deliver the data that you promised will count more. So I think we're going to see a slight drop in ARPU. I think ARPU is not going to continue to go up. And we know it's not going up for voice services.
Dave?
I guess what I would say is I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. I don't think it's so much of a war from one to the next. I think all phones will support femtocells and some phones will support Wi-Fi. That will continue to be the case, right? If you look at the Wi-Fi penetration today, the numbers are very, very low. But I would agree that it's changing very, very fast. Smartphones are coming out now with Wi-Fi in them. If you look right now in the U.S. market, I've done the math. It's 20% of the handsets have Wi-Fi in them, and that is a lot of the smartphones, right? And so I think that effectively that could mean that operators could see more smartphones with Wi-Fi and take advantage of that in one form or another. But I think that the fact remains that look at the iPhone, which is the case in point. The iPhone allows you to use Wi-Fi to access the internet, but it does not allow you to use any operator services over Wi-Fi, right? So there's no services over AT&T that are offered on that iPhone Wi-Fi. So the operator is not able to take advantage of that Wi-Fi connection, or has not for one reason or another. And so Wi-Fi is mainly just being used for open access. And so I think that operators continue to have a lot of motivation to be wanting to provide their services over that trusted network that they had in the past. And so you'll continue to see both of these two things evolve, I think, for two different purposes.
But what I wondered about, David, if you were talking about not using Wi-Fi not using Skype on Wi-Fi, but using Skype on the data portion of your FemtoCell. So it's actually you're using your data minutes or your bytes, using Skype over your data bytes, not over Wi-Fi.
Exactly. Well, so there's two things I'm considering here. One is if you buy a gigabyte of data, which you can get for about $20 in Europe, you can make an enormous number of minutes. I did the calculation sometime, but it's like more than continuous talking for several days for $20. And on Skype, that can pretty much mean anywhere in the world. The second area is more about international calls, where that's a big premium value add for operators. So although typically you get a package with so many minutes and you use that national calling plan and it almost seems free, when you're making international calls, that's where operators make quite a lot of margin, particularly roaming calls. And if there's a way of bypassing that, that's good. We have a question at the back.
Yeah, I was wondering what your opinion is.
Speak up, please.
I was wondering if you could comment on, I might have missed it in the beginning, but is there an advantage to coverage inside of a building with FemtoCell versus Wi-Fi, would the FemtoCell coverage capabilities offer some advantages?
I think that's what it's all about. It's effectively a base station, that's being connected over the broadband connection. So you're getting a full signal that's coming right from that femtocell. So you're getting full coverage wherever you need it indoors, wherever you put a femtocell. And were you comparing that to Wi-Fi? Is that?
Well, I was curious about whether you were going to, let's say you have a large facility,
Mm.
and you can deploy Wi-Fi internally for that building, or you could deploy femtocells, or you could do both. I was just kind of curious as to if femtocell would have a particular advantage.
I think
1,000 feet becomes 1,000 feet.
I think today you would if you want to support voice and data services today you would do both. You would deploy both. I mean, you would deploy the femtocells primarily because all the cell phones could connect to those femtocells and make calls. All right, and you would deploy the Wi-Fi as all enterprises do today because that's a good way to do access the internet and connect into the corporate network and so forth on the data side. So I think you would do both, but I think that you could set up a network with only femtocells. And you could get both the voice and the data. That would happen as well. I just think that if you were doing it today, it's still early days, right? And you'd probably deploy both.
So it's more about the devices that you're trying to connect and the services that you're trying to offer, rather than that we determine the solution. I think we have two hands up. The gentleman in the orange T-shirt.
Do anyone's femtocells also do Wi-Fi?
I'm sorry?
Do anyone on the market, any femtocells on the market also do Wi-Fi?
It depends on what you mean by the market. So what I mean by that is that there are plenty of companies, the likes of Thomson, Pirelli Broadband, Netgear, and so forth, that have products that do Wi-Fi and femtos both. They're DSL residential gateways and so forth that will do both services. Now, what I'm saying is the manufacturers have those products ready. In terms of the products that are actually in the store today, they're standalone femtos. They're the ones that are in Vodafone's, Sprint's, Verizon, StarHub shops. They're standalone, right? So that converged integrated product has not been offered yet. However, I believe that 3 years from now you'll see mainly that product. In 3 years, I believe that you'll see primarily the integrated one in the shop rather than the standalone one. But I think we will go through a standalone phase first.
Yeah, if I could jump in and take my lawyer hat off. The gateway, which is what you're talking about, the home gateway is sort of the holy grail for the Netgears of the world to have a femtocell built into a gateway, and for it's benefiting the cellcos because you can have music, all your downloads of video come right to the home gateway, and it will encourage and be stored there for the family to use. It will encourage the cell phone user to download that data-heavy products from their home gateway, as opposed to doing it when they get in the car and drive around town and using the macro network.
And we had another question from
comparing Wi-Fi and FemtoCell, is there a seamless handover between FemtoCells or FemtoCell and cellular stations?
There's a difference between the residential ones and the enterprise ones. The enterprise ones have the femto to femto handover. The residential ones do not, because typically you're dealing with one femtocell, and that's just an issue of cost and complexity and so forth. But yes, for example, on the Sprint system today, I can start a call in my home on that Sprint femtocell, and then I can get in my car and drive to work, and that call hands over to the macro network, and it's a seamless handover.
It completely depends upon, so it's Wi-Fi completely depends upon the technology you're using to use the Wi-Fi, right? So UMA, unlicensed mobile access, is a 3GPP standard for providing service via that vehicle, and it would support the signaling protocols necessary for a handover. But if you're doing a Skype or an alternative technology, so if you're equating Wi-Fi and trying to say, would my Wi-Fi hand over to my macro when I walk out the door, I would say that completely depends upon your access technology, right? I mean,
on the UMA software, also in the phone, in the network.
Yeah, a lot of phones have Wi-Fi, but very few of them have a SIP client or some software on them, like the T-Mobile hotspot, its own home service, for example, that would allow that particular handover to take place. But as long as you have Wi-Fi and that SIP client and you're going into a UMA network and so forth, then you can do that.
In theory, LTE should be able to do that, right?
Yeah, I think just to be, I think your question was particularly can FemtoCells, can a call on a FemtoCell hand over to the macro cellular network? And the answer is yes. All of the systems today allow you to have outgoing handover, but when it comes to incoming handover, sometimes that's not supported today because the outdoor cell site can't actually tell the mobile which signal to search for. So there's some limitations there. LTE has that absolutely built in from day one, so 4G solves the problem. A question at the back there?
What is your status on the FemtoCells for enterprise? How many users will be supported? When do you think that should come out?
I would just say it's a gray area, only because when you start talking about femtocells in the enterprise, you immediately need to also talk about picocells and other types of solutions. The enterprise has a lot of different types of solutions that may exist. But there are femtocells that range from 4 to 32 channels, primarily, that connect over a standard broadband connection, that support handover, that do extensive interference mitigation and can handle the extra workload necessary for the enterprise. So there are a couple of carriers in the world that have announced doing enterprise femtocells, and I think that most operators that have put out RFPs and so forth are looking to do both. They think that if they're going to be doing femtocells, why not be doing enterprise as well as residential? And sometimes you can even use the residential in a SOHO environment, right? Because the capacity and coverage and so forth is, if it's appropriate for a residence, it can be appropriate for a small business as well.
Will it be in the next year or two, or will it be 3 to 5 years? Yes.
When will enterprise femtos be launched?
The large enterprises be able to adopt FemtoCells to solve the coverage problems.
Next year. Next year you'll see full-fledged enterprise femtos available. And there's already been some operators that have announced them. I think it's just a matter of when will an operator, I mean, if you're talking about the U.S., when will an operator first announce that in the U.S.? I think it'll happen next year.
I mean, IP access is not here today, but they would tell you that there's a strong deployment of picocells in the enterprise. And if you're an enterprise customer of a cellco, they're going to ensure that picocell is going to be on the site. So that's happening pretty aggressively, right? It's been happening for the last couple of 3 years, maybe 5 if you wanted to.
I saw a presentation from a US operator, a very small one called Cellcom, based in Wisconsin, of all places. I think they've only got about 200,000 subscribers, but they have commercially deployed femtocells for 1 or 2 of their specific enterprise customers. And they're the same ones that you'd have in a domestic environment. The other couple of points I'd quickly make, one is the size of the market. So we're looking at 10 million plus femtocells for the domestic market, which is how they're going to get the cost down through volume. But maybe for enterprise, you might be 500,000 or something like that market size. Functionally, you need more things in an enterprise femtocell, and vendors like Airva, IP Access, and Ubiquisys all have demonstrated some additional features for the enterprise customer. An example being this kind of environment where at the end of the session you'll probably all go out and switch on your phone and try and make calls. So being able to direct the traffic in an intelligent and automatic way to wherever this sort of moving crowd of high usage is quite an important capability.
What's the degradation on the fixed broadband if you're using femtocells?
and especially if for people who are both your fixed provider and your wireless provider. So they're like triple play.
Well, you'll find, so it completely obviously depends upon your broadband access mechanism.
Like let's say if I have voice, I have like Uverse, I have blah blah, all that other stuff on my fixed broadband, and now I'm putting FemtoCell, which is another burden on top of
So you'll find, and even in the standards process Femto form, you'll find that some operators are very sensitive to that. So what they do is they target the least common denominator access, if you will, and they try to fit a lot of requirements into not a lot of bandwidth to preserve that broadband user experience. They can't count on quality of service to say, let's prioritize the Femto call over another call. So they really do try to be sensitive to the bandwidth requirements on the backhaul. So but it goes back to it completely depends upon your backhaul.
Could I ask, I mean, we are at a 4G evolution conference. Is IMS going to help solve that problem? You know, is the technology coming where rather than just being best effort, all these competing services in your home, IMS will be able to actively manage and ensure the good quality?
Well, certainly IMS counts for the mechanisms, but I think the assumption typically in Femto deployments is that you don't control the access network to the same extent. So while you could attempt to prioritize traffic, I don't think IMS necessarily is the key to that. It's the same question of what you have in the access technology, whether or not you could prioritize the traffic. The active or the dynamic mechanisms that IMS provides you would not typically hook into this third-party access network, right? So you're not going to be able to see the benefits. The best you could do is put a QoS on the packet and hope the third-party access network.
I guess I would take a slightly different view, which is I think that in the places where FemtoCells are being implemented in an IMS light kind of architecture, for example, with some of the CDMA operators, SoftBank's another example, I do think that their plans are to look at taking some of the very heavy traffic services and offloading the network while maybe keeping some of the very specific wireless ones on the legacy network. And I think that given that they have an IMS Lite network already, they have, let's say, the CSCF function operating. They're doing some signaling, some registration. They're taking a step in that direction, as David is saying. And one of the things that's very nicely aligned with is local breakout. So the idea of doing, SIP-based services and so forth in the home and having somebody that's going straight out to the internet and not through the network at all. And I think that is something that when we do business cases for operators and so forth, they very much ask for that to be a part of their plan. So it may not be something that's happening today, but I do think that David has a point that I think over time, as the evolution toward these networks continues, that will be a mechanism to do some of this offload.
Okay, I agree. I guess the context I understood it to be impact on the broadband, but yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, too many adverts for my company there. The gentleman in the blue shirt at the back who's been patiently waiting. Thank you.
Are there proximity issues with regard to how many FemtoCells you can have in a given space? Say you have 3 different carriers in a particular global or space like that. Do they cause interference with each other?
Good question. In case anybody didn't catch that, are there any limits to the number of FemtoCells you can have in a tight space? Do they interfere with each other? David?
There are no physical limits. It's just a matter of having the proper interference mitigation techniques built into the femtos so that they can basically modulate their power, right? So they're aware of each other, and they can do things like channel assignment and things such as adaptive power control and so forth. So that is built into the enterprise solutions as well as built into the residential solutions that are going to be going into apartment complexes and so forth. So there's no limit in that particular scenario, and there are a number of operators that are looking at those sorts of deployments. And I think that it's made easier when you have multiple channels available, right? When you're in a shared channel environment where everybody's on the same channel, that can be more challenging. But in many cases, you're looking at a multiple channel scenario where you can do a little shifting of people onto different channels to handle and mitigate that interference.
So that only applies to single carriers, but multiple carriers will have different spectrum that they're going to be on, so they're not going to be interfering with each other. And I know from in the past, not just Airvana, but all the other operators and who are involved in FemtoCells, this was a big issue in the beginning about how to, whether they would have a central controller controlling each FemtoCell in terms of powering it up and down. But I think that the industry is headed more towards self-regulation of each FemtoCell, so that if it sees other FemtoCells nearby, that it will power down. The sort of third concept is from the RAN side of the business, the macro towers. And there was a big concern that if you light up, everyone knows that if you put a booster on your home to light, does anyone here have a booster at their home? So you can go on the internet and buy a booster for about $400, put up an antenna on top of your house, and it will boost the signal into your house. It's not a FemtoCell. And that really interferes with the propagation ability of the macro tower. And I think, and you might be able to respond, but this is an issue on the network side of having FemtoCells interfere with the macro tower.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately, in the beginning, the macro and the femtos look alike to one another, but and so they can self-regulate just the same way they do. But ultimately, yes, I mean having there be some communication between the macro tower and the femtocell, as well as having handsets that are aware of this going on, then you can do a lot more clever things, longer term. But initially, these deployments are happening, and the techniques are in place, being standardized and so forth to address the issues that you were mentioning.
I think when I compare the tools that operators use today to plan their radio networks and tune them up and optimize them, which are tend to be back office, big analysis and processing going on, and then they decide what the parameters are and set them in each cell site. That's radically different to a FemtoCell, where you plug it in and it self-determines, it sniffs around the environment, works out what the power levels are. Some of them even communicate with other femtocells to negotiate what they should be doing. That kind of approach is scalable to 10 million femtocells, which isn't scalable, or hasn't been needed in the past, and that's an important aspect for what will be included in 4G technology.
Sorry, I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks. One at the back there, corner.
Could one of you please illustrate the difference again between femto and picocell?
I think it's a very fuzzy line. It's not hard and fast. The only David can take a shot at this as well, or anybody else on the panel. But femtocells tend to be things that are installed by a consumer. It's something that goes over the broadband network. It's something that is plug and play. It's very low power. It's lower capacity. It's a consumer product that it's sold for a few $100s and so forth, right? A picocell is very close to, in my view, an enterprise femto. So as soon as you get to more of an industrial grade product, which is higher capacity, higher power, typically installed by a radio engineer, it's installed by the operator. It could be installed by the IT manager. It depends, on how sophisticated they are. But it's enterprise femtos and picos are, in my view, very similar types of products.
Yeah.
Is the range slightly bigger too? Picocell?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to add, this goes to the heart of the naming issue, femtocell and picocell. And, you've got micro, nano, pico, and femto. So any of the engineers here know that that's the 10 to the minus in size. And they originally came up with a name, as I understand it, to equate, 100 square meters with the femtocell.
Right.
And then
it's
1,000 square
-12
meters with the pico.
That was 10 to the
idea.
minus 15.
Right.
I think Dave summed it up very well, but if you want a really good answer, then do go to thinkfemtocell.com. I have a web page explicitly discussing that. Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists for a very extensive set of answers, and to thank the audience for both being attentive and asking some very good questions. I can't help myself but plug thinkfemtocell.com. Great website. It's got some blog entries, but you can also sign up for a newsletter, and there's a lot of information there. And I also have a book, one of the 2 books that were written on FemtoCells, and you can come and ask me about that later. So I think we're all around for the rest of the day. Do feel happy to approach any of the members of the panel if you've got any further follow-up questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. We are moving.